For years, Blizzard said that vanilla servers were a bad idea for World of Warcraft. Not gonna happen, no way, no how. So what changed? How did they go from this?
You think you do, but you don't.
To this?
But I understand that for some of you, your favorite flavor is vanilla.
Most people think the answer is simple. Money. But if that's really all it took, why didn't Blizzard jump on board when old school RuneScape blew up? Jagex had shown the world that MMO nostalgia was a freaking gold mine, but Blizzard didn't even bat an eye. 8 months later, they were still brushing off fans, saying classic servers are never gonna happen, so stop asking for them, blah 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 blah. That's why, as a fan and a former game master, I don't buy that it was just about the money. I think something else forced their hand. A decision so unpopular, a moment so explosive that Blizzard basically had no choice but to change their stance on classic servers. But to understand what that moment was, we need to go back to 2007. 2007. Soulja Boy was taking over the radio. The first iPhones were hitting store shelves, and everybody's favorite Spider-Man movie was dancing it up at the box office. But 2007 was also the year that World of Warcraft's first expansion dropped, The Burning Crusade. And to say fans were excited is an understatement.
My dog loves World of Warcraft. Whenever we play it, she likes to roll up underneath the desk and fall asleep while we're playing.
Now, for all the youngins in the audience, I need to explain something. See, back in the day, we couldn't just click buttons from our couches and buy video games. No, we had to go out into the real world, to these strange and dangerous places called stores. They were terrible. But this was actually one of the good ones. And Fry's Electronics went all out for Burning Crusade's launch. Developers signing copies, fans camping out, even a freaking dance contest. But here's the thing. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and I think it's easy to look back on this moment in WoW history and tell ourselves how united the community was or how much we were all enjoying the game. But that's just a fairy tale. It's not really how things were. And I think one of the big reasons for that was that Burning Crusade wasn't just about a shiny new continent or a brand new mechanic like flying. It also started changing things. Fundamental parts of the game that players had been enjoying since 2004. Yes, it was a critical and commercial success, but among all the positive reactions, there were also fans feeling uneasy about the direction the game was heading in, and they weren't afraid to speak up. Why the Burning Crusade has destroyed WoW. Blizzard makes their own content obsolete again. Arena points suck. 25-man raids suck. Heroics suck. I need therapy. Heck, if you go to the World of Warcraft forum on MMO Champion and you sort by oldest posts, you'll find that the very first thread someone made there was a person venting about changes to alchemy. My point is, these discussions, this tug of war over WoW's game design, they've been going on since the beginning. And this desire for the game to either stop changing or be different represents one part of the formula and how private servers came to be. But the second part, the thing that made them actually possible, is the sheer fact that World of Warcraft's players have always been, how do I put this? Tinkerers, modders, script kiddies that started on Lua code. Hey dude, where do I go for this quest? No problem, bro. I got you. Just download this add-on. Oh, thanks, man. And how do I beat this boss? Easy peasy. I'm sending you the strats right now. Okay, so last thing. There's this girl that I like a lot, and she's really, really cute, but I don't know how to talk to her. What should I say? Yeah, we got a script for that. Anything the community needed, from add-ons and extensions to dedicated websites to track raid progression, they made it themselves. Don't laugh at me too much, but one of my very first memories ever playing World of Warcraft was my buddy Stu sitting me down. I had just installed the game, and I was super excited to get my Hemi on, my rogue butt running around the world doing sappy things. And my buddy Stu looked me in the eye and he told me, Clyde, in order to successfully get your Hemi on, you're gonna need to know when your energy is gonna tick. You need an add-on. The base game didn't have any on-screen timer for rogue players, so their energy would just chunk up every 3 or 4 seconds. But not knowing precisely when that would happen was not ideal, so the community took it upon themselves to build a solution. They created an add-on, a simple timer that would let players know when their energy was ticking up. Very simple, but very effective. The point is, the WoW community has never sat around on their butts, waiting for Blizzard to implement quest helpers or damage charts. No, fans made those things. And if Blizzard wasn't going to give players the WoW experience they wanted, well, they'd find a way to do that too. When most people think of private servers for WoW, they think of the big ones. The ones that got shut down, or had crazy experience rates, and had funky events going on. But that's not how they started. The very first private servers were WoW fans playing around with the code, just to see what was possible, to push the limits of the system, then even take a peek behind the curtain, or just explore the world. Early projects like Stormcraft and WoW Daemon and Mangos paved the way for more complex, feature-complete private servers later on. Here's how one of the former developers on the Mangos project put it. Every WoW server emulator in existence today owes a debt to those who came before. Whether it's Mangos or Ascent or one of the many forks like Trinity, CMangos, or ArcEmu. We've built on over a decade of work by hundreds of developers. Mangos was started as a leak from the old WoW Daemon server source, standing on the shoulders of giants, as it were. And I know there's people on the other side of the screen right now going, Clyde, why the history lesson? I'm here for the memes and the Blizzard drama and those hunky dancing Tauren. And trust me, we're gonna get there. But I've made mention of these early private servers because 1, they've been here since the beginning, and 2, they took a ton of hard work and a ton of coordination to make possible. Seeing these projects and how they evolved reminds me a lot of the fan mods we see in games today. Of course, there's a million great examples out there, but my go-to is always Flash Shifter, the guy that made Stardew Valley Expanded, which adds a ton of incredible content and new characters to the base game. If you haven't played it yet and you are finally ready to cheat on Harvey, then I recommend it. 10 out of 10, it is a good time. But my point is, even as iconic as Flash Shifter is, I seriously doubt that if I added him on social media and I asked, yo dude, did you make everything in Stardew Valley Expanded 100% from scratch? He'd probably just give me a laughing guy emoji. That is just not how coding and game development works in 2025. It is a community of people who are all coming together to learn and create awesome things. Yeah, and I'm gonna be real, I think it's a little disrespectful to all of those early developers if we just skip over them and start this conversation with Nostalrius and Elysium. It's a disservice to those communities and their development teams. And likewise, I'm gonna include some links in the pinned comment if you wanna learn more about early private server history, because trust me, it's interesting and wonky and very much a good watch. Also, before I move on, I have to show y'all this absolutely ridiculous clip I found while doing research for this episode. Just listen to this reporter shame the bejesus out of this child on the evening news over their WoW addiction.
My choice to play it. My choice to be addicted to it.
Cameron reckons he can stand up and walk away whenever he wants. But try telling that to his mum. Denise believes he's hooked. And just like an alcoholic, a smoker, or a drug addict, getting off, beating the habit, is going to be an enormous challenge.
Bro, I'm in the room with you. I can hear you. I'm not a drug addict. And look, obviously I'm not a parent yet, but I'm just saying, if I had a kid and I caught them playing WoW at 4 in the morning, I would ask him 3 important questions. Number 1, what server do you play on? Number 2, Horde or Alliance? And number 3, can your old man get a guild invite? Which they would immediately regret, because the very first thing I'd do is I'd jump in guild chat and I'd go, I'm Benji's dad and I'm 40 and I used to work at Blizzard. Anyway, with all that context in mind about how the game was changing and player opinions were divided, as well as those early primitive private servers popping up, Blizzard was clearly going to have to address it at some point. And one of the earliest acknowledgements and rejections for the idea of WoW Classic came in the form of a response on their forums from one of their community managers. We were at one time internally discussing the possibility fairly seriously, but the long-term interest and continued play on them couldn't justify the extremely large amount of development and support resources it would take to implement and maintain them. Keep in mind, this bad boy was dated February 21st, 2008. Half a year before the original Wrath of the Lich King expansion launched, and more than a decade before WoW Classic would see the light of day. Let's just repeat that last part for dramatic emphasis. They've been saying no to this question for more than 10 years. But like a bunch of juiced up murlocs, fans were gonna keep bugging him about it. I know that back in the day working as a game master, I got my fair share of tickets asking this exact same question. And our response was always that canned nonsense. While we don't have anything official to announce at this time, stay tuned to official Blizzard channels and lick my... Besides, we all know the big one. That time a fan literally asked J. Allen Brack at BlizzCon, and rather than respond respectfully, he decided to turn into a meme.
Have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
No. And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, But you don't.
Are you sure about that?
But the real OGs will remember a copy pasta from back in the day called the Wall of No. This thing would make its way between guild forums and vent servers listing all the reasons that Blizzard would never make WoW Classic a thing. Anytime anyone brought the topic up, somebody was sure to paste this bad boy. And it was a gnarly write-up, and it very much echoed that snarky tone that Blizzard leadership had used. Proponents are asking for a regression to the past, where things were not better than they are now. And they want to drag everyone else in the game with them. You will have no better chance of getting Blizz to do this than you would convincing the movie industry to make black and white only films. My guy, have you seen The Lighthouse? It's a cinematic masterpiece. Also, for anyone following on my dorky adventures as an undead rogue back in the day, I distinctly remember that when we hit max level and I was on US Ilaria Horde side, I was applying to my first ever raiding guild. And we didn't have Discord back then, so I had to go on their guild forums and write a 3,000 word essay on why I was a good rogue, and I was always do the most DPS, and I would get my Hemi on. And please, please, please let me join your raiding guild. And I remember checking the post like after a couple of days, and one of their recruitment officers had replied, and it was the funniest reply I'd ever seen. It was like, all it said was, wall of text crits you, you die. I don't even think they read my application, but honestly, fair play on them. I didn't know what paragraphs were. But yeah, that period of time just after 2013, where Blizzard had made their stance on the idea of classic servers very clear, was an important one. Fans of the idea were being told no by the company and by their fellow players, but they weren't going to let that stop them. If Blizzard wasn't going to give these people a classic server, they were going to make one themselves. Let's get one thing straight. Nostalrius wasn't the first private server. Not even close. It also wasn't the most exciting, or glamorous. There weren't any wild, game-changing mechanics, or night elf parties with questionable substances being passed around. Wait, there were? And I missed them? Joking aside, what Nostalrius did nail was its presentation. Its trailers weren't just ads. They were metaphorical summoning stones, inviting players back to a time when WoW just felt like an adventure. Do you remember what it felt like the first time you rode the Zeppelin? Or laid eyes on Booty Bay? Or stepped into Stranglethorn Vietnam Vale? It's no surprise these trailers spread like wildfire across Discord and social media. The message was loud and clear. This is the classic WoW experience you've been waiting for. Even if Blizzard doesn't get it, we do. Come and relive this amazing game with us. And my dudes, you probably already know this, but Nostalrius kinda blew the fuck up. Within 2 months, over 100,000 accounts had signed up. The hype was real. The gaming world had noticed. Even the Battle.net forums were loaded with posts of people freaking losing their minds. And at this point, everyone was saying the same thing.
As far as I'm concerned, that's America's
game. Alright, so let's zoom out for a second. It's easy to look at the numbers and the media buzz surrounding Nostalrius and think, that's it. This is what finally got Blizzard on board with the idea of classic, right? But I think that's only half the story. The other half, the part that doesn't get nearly as much attention, comes down to a single word: community. And I'm talking about this specific community. These specific players that were unlike any that had made up private servers before. To find out why, I sat down with Celise, a private server veteran that's been playing him for years, way before Nostalrius ever even came along. And let me tell you, what he told me blew my freaking mind.
How do you feel like the community changed when Nostalrius came around? Do you think the changes were positive or negative? What kind of conversations did you notice? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Americans, that's the biggest. It's the changing the culture. That is the number one, by far, biggest thing that I noticed. There were not very many American players on any other server. And when there were Americans were the minority. So the Americans either made their own guilds that were small or just embraced the community that was already there and didn't try to create something new. But with Nostalrius, there was a critical mass and there was just its own culture, independent of what had existed before. And it was like, it's going to be this way now. Like a lot of it is language, like slang, just the way that, like, you ever heard the term prio, for example, or CBA, or things like that? Like, those were very common in EU circles at the time, but were not common if you were to look at, like, Wrath of the Lich King era, like, NA servers. Those are bad examples, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and culture is a real thing. Like, server culture is so different between even just retail servers. But I totally can imagine, like, what you're saying is that, like, this whole new wave of people had an aftershock effect on Nostalrius and the kind of players that were coming in, the language they used, the expectations they had, you know, the kinds of ways they even wanted to play the game, and what their goals were for the game. I have to imagine that Nostalrius, you know, it was night and day from what had come before it. That is really interesting. That's super interesting. I appreciate you sharing your insights on that.
Those freaking Americans, why's it always gotta be us causing a ruckus? But in all seriousness, I think this is actually pretty interesting. The fact that, up until this point, most private servers had been populated primarily by European players. That's not to say that Americans were totally unaccounted for. Solis was just one of many that played, but the overall player base skewed heavily towards our friends across the pond. And look, I might be about to put my foot in my mouth here, but I think there's a cultural reason for that. Joining a private server back in the day wasn't plug and play. You had to do some tinkering, download a third-party client, poke around in folders, edit your realm list. Shout out to the real ones that remember doing that stuff. But it's also true to say that this was probably more work than most casuals were willing to do back in the day. And it was even more complicated the older back you go. Y'all, it took my friend group literally begging me to install Ventrilo back in the day when we were playing Team Fortress Classic. I'm gonna sound super old saying this, but I was one of those people that was like, bro, we have AOL Instant Messenger. Why would we need anything else? We have text communication. Oh my god, I'm so old. The point is, Nostalrius had a sign-up process that was just polished enough that casual audiences were able to jump on board. It was the right game, at the right time, packaged in just the right way for it to take off. So when Blizzard slapped Nostalrius with a cease and desist on April 6th of 2016, it gutted that community, with more than 800,000 accounts going poof.
On April 10th, a popular fan server known as Nostalrius, with 150,000 active members, was closed after the threat of legal action by Blizzard Entertainment.
Blizzard just dunked on Nostalrius, but they told us they have passion for classic WoW, but what does that even mean?
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
And look, I acknowledge I'm giving the SparkNotes version of this history. This video would be 3 hours long otherwise. But I want to point out, we're talking about people reliving their childhoods. People discovering classic WoW for the first time with their friends. Whole guilds forming and thriving and raiding and putting on ridiculous events in World PvP. And Blizzard looked at all that and just said, yeah, shut it down. I think it's pretty easy to see why fans were upset. For years, Blizzard had been saying, we're not going to do vanilla servers, they're too complicated, can't be done, blah blah blah. And here they were, nuking a project by fans that had pulled it off. Of course, gamers took to social media and forums and even protests within retail WoW to voice their frustration, to make Blizzard understand they were making the wrong decision. And if that wasn't dramatic enough, they even held a march to voice their displeasure, in which players walked all the way from Orgrimmar to Thunderbluff and leaped off the highest peak to their dooms to show how upset they were. This is the amount of passion Blizzard was up against. Petitions and ugly headlines and angry forum posts and people that just wanted to experience Classic with their friends. And the laughable thing, the thing that really ticked people off, is that even after this takedown, Blizzard continued to use the exact same talking points they'd been using for years. We explored options for developing Classic servers, and none could be executed without great difficulty. If we could push a button and all of this would be created, we would, super serial. However, there are tremendous operational challenges to integrating Classic servers, not to mention the ongoing support of multiple live versions for every aspect of WoW. There are so many memes I am tempted to put here, from the South Park nipple guys, or Justin Timberlake, but honestly, none of them would do the situation justice. We wanted to give Blizzard our money. We were begging them to just cash the freaking checks. That's why at the start of this video, I said it was never about the money. A team of unpaid fans had made Vanilla WoW a reality. Nearly 1 million players showed up to play it. Hundreds of thousands of players signed petitions in support of it. The gaming world was foaming at the mouth for Classic servers. And Blizzard continued to insist, it's just too difficult, we're sorry.
We thought that EverQuest was a really deep game, but they had some... They had an assumption that this type of game would only appeal to hardcore RPG players. And they crafted the game with that assumption in mind, I think.
How does the saying go? History doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. In 2017, Blizzard's then CEO Mike Morhaime was happy enough to boast they'd gotten it right when EverQuest got it wrong. But right under their noses, the exact same thing was happening. They were assuming something about their players. Assuming that nobody wanted to go back and relive the past. Only this time the shoe was on the other foot. They were dead wrong. Nostalrius had proved it to the world. Its backlash had spelled it out in big, bold capital letters. But it also proved something else. Something I think finally clicked inside the executives' heads at Blizzard that day. It was finally beginning to dawn on them that fans were never gonna let this go. So what do you do if you're a big company and there's gamers out in the world using your IP, playing your game in ways that you didn't intend or couldn't easily monetize? Do you come down on them? Lawyer up? Begin an endless dance of C&Ds and legal threats? What if they won? What if they took something you'd made and made something better? Something even more successful? I think it's mind-blowing to look back on the story of how WoW Classic came to be, all the teeth pulling and pain that it took, because you'd think this would have been a lesson Blizzard learned the first time around with Dota 2. In Dota 2, Blizzard had watched a fan mod find a life of its own, to the point where they completely lost control of the reins. Not just on the product itself, which had started out just as a fan mod, but the fans, the community. Valve had swooped up IceFrog and the trademark for the name. And unfortunately, no amount of promoting Heroes of the Storm, aka Blizzard All-Stars, was gonna bring the community back. That ship had sailed. And this moment right here, this backlash Blizzard was facing over vanilla WoW, was a real fork in the road for them. Down one path, they could engage in years of legal battles, playing whack-a-mole with private servers as they popped up. They could continue to upset fans and enjoy bad press as often as they liked. Maybe in the end, they'd squash enough people that the crowd would move on. But it wouldn't be fun, and it definitely wouldn't be a good look for anyone. But there was another option, a road less traveled. They could do what they didn't the first time around. They could listen to their fans and reflect and come to the table. And you and I sitting here, we know the answer's obvious. We know which answer leads to happy fans and buckets of money and goodwill from the community. The answer had been obvious for years. But for me, I think it was this do or die moment for Blizzard. This realization that this battle was never going to go away that forced their hand. So reluctantly, begrudgingly, Blizzard made the right decision. Well, sort of. After a solid month of backlash and meltdowns, Blizzard invited several folks from the Nostalrius team to Blizzard HQ to present the case for vanilla, which included a post-mortem document that fully detailed not just their development process, but also offered a detailed market analysis for the project. And look, I don't know what those meetings looked like. I was not there. It is entirely possible the executives brought out the cheese and crackers and bottles of Big Red. Wait a minute. You don't know what Big Red is?
It tastes great. And there's a lot to be said for being different. Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing fine.
But the one thing we do know about how that meeting with Blizzard went is that 6 months later, the Nostalrius folks were openly reporting they'd been ghosted. They were saying, hey, we've offered Blizzard our help, we've reached out, but they are not returning our emails. Blizzard had entered their cocoon. Some fans were heated, calling the whole thing a PR stunt to get fans to cool off. Other fans were spamming "let them cook by gosh darn it" in Baron's chat all day long. I was probably doing a little of column A and B. But whatever thought experiments Blizzard was doing behind the scenes, the important thing to know is that they were finally willing to actually get on board with WoW Classic. And just 17 short months later, they took the stage at BlizzCon to announce it. And I'm proud to say that everyone in the community remained calm and perfectly reasonable.
Before I get to the big news, I want to take a minute. And I want to talk about ice cream. Cookies and cream is actually my all-time favorite dessert. But I understand that for some of you, your favorite flavor is vanilla.
So we're back here, at another one of these moments that we like to tell ourselves that everything was perfect and we were all in a harmonious celebration. But that's not entirely true. And besides, no matter how excited we were that this day had finally arrived, there were many people, myself included, that looked at the situation and wondered why it had been so painful to get there in the first place. Why did it take a decade of sneering from Blizzard, of them literally laughing at their fans to their faces, and shutting the idea down, and making the wrong assumptions at every turn? Look, am I happy that we have Classic? Absolutely, I'm ecstatic, genuinely. When it came out, me and my friends, all of us in our 30s mind you, we landed up like it was 1998. We busted out the Mountain Dew and Taco Bell, and yes, I had my reading glasses. And we played all freaking night long. That's the kind of power this game has. To bring people together, to relive those special moments from MMO history. I think that's worth remembering, and celebrating, and in cases where it's called for, worth fighting for. But look, I'm gonna be real with y'all. No matter how Blizzard tries to frame this product, I don't think they ever did it for the fans. One of Blizzard's core values that they list on their company website is every voice matters. It's on their freaking statues outside their offices, for crying out loud. I read those words every single day when I worked as a game master, and I believed them. Blizzard tells the world that they care. They tell their fans that they're listening. But is that really true? What about all the other times where they promised one thing and did another? Where they sneered and belittled people who paid money to come to their events and celebrate their games? For many companies, any one of those moments would have been a PR catastrophe. But for Blizz, it's just another quarter. And it's a freaking good reminder as to why they are not your friend. And one quick last thing I'll say on this topic for now before we close things out for today. I know there's a lot more history that goes into WoW Classic and the private servers. Goodness knows I could make another 20 videos on WoW Classic and its implementation and its spell batching and all the numerous differences from the original experience. But I would only want to make those videos if people are actually interested in watching them. But either way, thank you so much for the time today. Thank you for checking out the video. Thank you to our patrons for supporting the channel. Thank you to our YouTube members. I could not do this without y'all. And I just want to say thank you for being a WoW player. The game itself has changed so freaking much over the years. The classes and the races and the raids and the continents, the locations, it's all changed. But the players are what have always made the game special. Their antics and shenanigans and crazy PK raids and all that stuff. And I am very, very grateful to have been a part of that, if only for a short while. So from the bottom of my cold, frozen, mustachy heart, I say thank you. You're the best. See y'all next time, and bye.